on now. Some countries have toned down on their stance. This is regarding the Israel-Hamas war, especially after the International Court of Justice ruling. For more on this now, we still have, of course, political analyst Mr. Sandile Swana. Alongside him is SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena joining us for more analysis on this. So thank you very much for joining us once again on the program. So Sophie, let's perhaps start with you. I'm going to backtrack a bit, perhaps to the conversation you had with the International Affairs Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor. She said, we're experiencing a bit of a pushback by Israel in terms of how they would not be importing grapes to South Africa and with the flights as well. Are we likely to see other countries also following suit?
Well, clearly those countries that are supporting Israel will do that. You know that, as you pointed out, there are reports that the import and the exports between the two countries is affected. But you expect some countries to be sympathetic to the Israel government's cause or the state. And you know that countries such as the United States of America, you know, countries such as the United Kingdom, and some in Europe are supporting Israel. But I can't see formal sanctions against South Africa, as America did with Russia. But I think there will be those concerns behind the scenes, but I can't see a formidable force in terms of marginalization of South Africa. I don't know whether, Prof, you share that view.
Thank you so much, Sophie. The situation here that we've got to consider is that maybe let me start with this. By taking the matter to court, whatever could have been, for instance, regarded as insults and irresponsible statement has now been tested in court and the truth has been established. So the moral high ground of the United States of America and Israel has been eroded because the allegations have been tested in court and the court, an international jury has pronounced on the matter with an overwhelming majority that actually a lot of injustice is going on. The second consideration about the issue of possible sanctions and or not is that South Africa has had a bit of tension with the United States, for instance, before the AGOA had to be renewed. And in fact, it was renewed because it was clear that South Africa is leading AGOA in Africa. So it's no longer a case that South Africa is a non-entity that can be pushed to the left or to the right by the Western powers or even Western imperialists as they wish. The other thing that must be there is that with the loss of moral ground, that because of the judgment, even Europeans, a few of the Europeans, which we may not be talking about right now, are actually reconsidering their position because there has been always a solution to say, let these people share the land equitably amongst themselves, the native Palestinians and the Hebrews. Let them share the land equitably. The last thing I want to say about this is that, you know, the state of Israel was established a year before apartheid started in South Africa. In fact, in 1948, the year we started apartheid here, it's a very young state, and South Africa was already living and prospering for many years before that. And my view is that South Africans should never fear something that has not been quantified and alternatives explored. For instance, I think in the past few days, an announcement made that I think 5 nations have already joined BRICS. Have we asked ourselves the question whether if somebody were to decide to pull out of South Africa, are there alternatives? Because Israel, before now, during apartheid, together with the United States and the UK, supported apartheid in South Africa, supported and sponsored the apartheid state. Therefore, we cannot pretend that we are going to support them as South Africans in their apartheid in Israel, regardless of the cost.
And of course, given the powerful stature of the ICJ as well as countries such as the US of A, Sophie, are we hoping to see that we will see some countries also calling for the adherence to this order?
Yes, indeed. We saw what happened during the Security Council meeting this week, where many countries have called on the Israeli state to adhere to the order. Remember, they are signatories to the Genocide Convention, and you'd recall that this convention was established after 1948 as part of addressing what happened to the Jews then, and therefore many countries are part of this convention, and therefore there's no way member states can look away or ignore one organ of the United Nations, because this is a judicial organ of the United Nations. The World Court, the International Court of Justice, it is a UN organ, and therefore there has been calls that Israel must comply.
And does this also reaffirm our footing as South Africa on the global stage politically, Bob Swan?
Yes, we have had a lot of, over a long period of time, let alone the fact that in recent times we have been not exercising our profile correctly. But lately, of course, the case of the apartheid and genocide in Palestine being one case where South Africa demonstrated that we have the brain power and professional resources to actually attend to such injustices on an international level. We're not the only African country to do that, by the way. Gambia has done a similar thing in the case of Myanmar, what used to be known as Burma. So it's a time when Africans, including South Africa, are actually asserting themselves as well leaders in their own right.
And the state of asserting ourselves as Africa, Sophie, what does it mean for us? And what does it mean for us as South Africa, as a country?
Well, I think we have to be firm and really be consistent. You heard the president this week when he was addressing the ANC Lekgotla, particularly his closing remarks. He spoke about the fact that there will be a pushback and there will be pressure on South Africa. He went as far as saying that even in relation to some having interest in influencing the direction the country is taking, and you can only influence the direction the country is taking through elections. Now, many people are saying the president made such a statement fearing that the ANC is going to lose elections, and therefore they want to use this as a reason why they've lost elections. But when you look globally, during elections in countries that are influential, you have vested interest of different forces, and therefore the electoral systems of that particular country going to elections has to be up to the task, particularly when you look at hacking and IT in particular. And therefore, I think that kind of a statement is similar to what we see in America when America is going to elections, because there are people with vested interest, because they have different interests, and a particular leader might take a different position when elections are happening in countries such as Russia, in countries such as China. So this time around, that kind of information and statement speaks to that. However, I think the issue is that generally there's an agreement that Israel and Palestine must live side by side, and therefore a two-state solution is the main issue here. But perhaps let's take a listen at what Dr. Naledi Pandor had to say about South Africa's influence on the continent globally, and this matter putting us there, you know, the spotlight on South Africa's foreign policy, where there can be repercussions. Let's take a listen.
We are experiencing a pushback with the announcement that Israel will not import grapes from South Africa. I think they will be the loser because our grapes are really delicious. But also an apparent pushback by saying there'll be no flights from their airline. Well, I think those flights were not often very loaded with passengers, so I think it's an economic decision rather than a consequence of the ICJ ruling. The other concern is with some of the proposed resolutions in the United States House of Representatives. And there I think the diplomatic work must continue, because as we all know, America is one of the countries that often insists on the practice of democracy and the sovereign right to pursue a country's own foreign policy, but also articulates respect for global institutions such as the United Nations and its institutions such as the International Court of Justice.
And of course, we continue with our conversation now. Perhaps, Mr. Swana, let's get your immediate reaction to that clip, and also just to delve into the two-state solution and if this will be a long-lasting solution.
Thank you. The issue of bear in mind that the main protector of Israel is a very recent invention in Palestine. The whole land is Palestine. The very land that the Hebrews occupy is actually Palestine. And there were Hebrews there before. They were just part of the people. So we need to be careful even about this two-state solution. But the two-state solution can be implemented to the extent that it takes cognizance of the needs of all the ethnic groups that are there, especially the native ethnic groups. And the Hebrews are one, and the addition of European Jews. That's another discussion. The issue of, for instance, these pushbacks of the Americans and so on, just remember that during the anti-apartheid struggle, we developed as South Africa very strong lobbies in the United States, inside the United States. Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, and many others, Harry Belafonte, and many, many others, Farah Khan, and so on. So we have our own people inside the United States. So it's not as if Israel is the only one. They are the only ones with a voice in the United States. The so-called disinvestment by Israelis and Hebrews from South Africa, some of these programs, for instance, Oppenheimer started sending South African diamonds to Israel to be processed there in order to bolster that economy. So the Jewish state of Israel, or the Hebrew state of Israel, benefited from South Africa to be created in the first place. It's a very young state. It has just been a recent creation. So they've been exploiting the South African economy to build their own economy. And this is a time for South Africa to build partnerships with other African states to strengthen our trade relationships with BRICS and many other peoples of the world, and not be subjugated and subdued by the West, especially American and British imperialism. So the last thing I must comment on is this issue of the elections. Donald Trump took the election apparently with Russian interference in the US electoral system. Our intelligence service in South Africa, I hope Mufamadi and Cyril Ramaphosa have taken active steps to rebuild that system, our internal security and international security, so that we are not actually vulnerable to such threats where people, through hacking and other means, actually overthrow the government.
All right, so political analyst Sandile Swana, thank you so much for your time, as well as SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena. Thank you so much for your time and unpacking the many layers of this issue.